Matthew 16, verse 13. Then Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, everyone say this, who do people say? Whoa, okay. Let's read that together. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Very important phrase. So Jesus says to his disciples, who do people say that I am? Who do people say that I am? Verse 16, verse 14, the disciples replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Very interesting that they use these people, that John the Baptist, who was a relative of Jesus actually, who had been beheaded, Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Verse 15. But what about you? So he says, who do people say that I am? People around you, who do they say? What are you hearing? What are the rumors? Who do they say? But more importantly, because you're connected to me, more important to me that because we're family, more important because you're my disciples, who do you say that I am? Because your perspective of me is going to shape your future. Not necessarily right now their perspective, because you're going to be my models, because you're my disciples. I'm pouring and multiplying myself into you so that you can change the world. So more importantly, who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, the most vocal one in verse 16, says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. In other words, something invisible, someone supernatural named God the Father in this moment had opened up the heart of Peter to really see Jesus for who he was, for who he really is. And what we don't know, or you probably do know this verse, this passage, right after that, Jesus says, you are correct in saying so, and upon this rock, upon this revelation, which I've spoken before a few weeks ago, I'm going to build my what? Church, my ecclesia, the called out ones, the people, the living stones that make up the spiritual house of God. Upon this truth that I am what I say I am, and if I wasn't, then why wouldn't I? That's an Eminem song. I am what I say I am, and upon this rock, I am going to, only if you got that, build my house. I'm going to build my spiritual temple, the most important revelation or understanding or perspective that anybody can have. Now write this down if you're taking notes. It's my subject for this morning. Who am I? Who am I? Turn to your neighbor and say, who am I? This is very important. Who am I? Who do you say that I am? Ask your neighbor, who do you say that I am? Come on, ask them. That's an awkward question, right? It's an awkward question, right? Because their response has the power to define you, right? At some level. If you don't know who you are, other people, what they say about you has the power to define you. When you don't know, that's why people grow up, they go through junior high, which is like the most vulnerable, one of the most like game-changing ages. Their circumstances, the people around them, the peer pressure begins to define who they are. Well, you're this, you're overweight, you're too skinny, you're too loud, you're dumb, you're not smart. They begin to define, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know who you are, you're going to listen to everybody else around you. So it's a very important question. Really, it's the starting line to anything healthy when it comes to building life. It's the starting line to healthy spiritual life. Let's go back to Matthew 16, verse 15. He says, but what about you? So, this is what people are saying, but what about you guys? He asks, who do you say I am? Notice he doesn't say, who do you say I do, or what do people say I do, or what do people say I am? He says, who do people say I am? He doesn't say, what do people say I am? Because the what really is a reflection usually of what you do. People will look at you and say, oh, you're a businessman, right? That's not who you are, right? You're a doctor. They define you by what you do, not what am I? It's who am I? You're this. You're a family man. No, that's not who you are. Because what you do and what happens around you will always be changing. So then think about it. You're always going to be redefined in every new season because hopefully what you do grows and changes and morphs over time. But it doesn't change who you are. God is always doing a new thing. What God does is always different and always looks fresh and always looks new. But who He is remains the same. Right? Who He is stays the same. It stays consistent. But what He does and how He does it is always changing. It's a very, very defining question. Let's go to Exodus 3, verse 14 for a second. I want to open this up for a second. Exodus 3, verse 3. I'm just going to probably read it on the screen, actually. No, go to Exodus 3, verse 11. Exodus 3, verse 11. Yeah, I'll just read it here. Exodus 3, verse 11. But Moses protested to God, "Who am I? Who am I?" Now, this context is very interesting. This context, Moses is being called by God to do something incredible. He's hanging out. He's tending his father-in-law's sheep, his father-in-law Jethro. It's been 40 years since his exile. 40 years since his exile out of Egypt. He had murdered somebody, he fled, and he started to tend these sheep, and he was a sheep herder for 40 years in exile. 40 years goes by, he's now 80 years old, and he's walking by one day, and he sees this like fire, this burning bush, and he stops, and he turns to the side and begins to gaze at this burning bush. The bush is not being consumed. It's not being burned up, but there's a fire in this bush, and he begins to talk to the fire because a voice comes out of the fire, and it's God. Hebrews says that God is an all-consuming fire, and this, out of this fire, God begins to speak and describe this calling and this purpose over Moses' life. And he says, "I want you to go and deliver my people. I've heard their cries. I've heard their issues. I've heard their prayers. They've been in bondage. They've been struggling. I've heard all of this, and now I want to send you, the stuttering Moses. I want to send you, who can't really even speak. I want to send you at 80 years old, who has lived in exile, back to where you were from, and I want you to deliver my people. I want you to go to Pharaoh and say, 'Let my people go.'" And one of the first responses that Moses gives to God in this context is he says, "Who am I?" He protested. Anybody ever protested to God before? Anybody ever argued to God before? I did. I remember when I first started getting a realization of what God wanted me to do in my life, I protested. It scared me. I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a public communicator. And now I've traveled around the world, and that's what I do. But in the beginning, I really struggled with it, and I protested. I said, "Who am I to do this? Like, I don't feel like I have the skill or the ability." But how many know that it's not about our ability and skill most of the time? It's about His ability through us when we feel the weakest. That's where God gets the most glory and honor. And so he says, but Moses says, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" And then it goes on. There's this conversation that Moses begins to have with God. Now flip over to verse 14. Verse 14. So basically, Moses says, "Okay, so what do I say? Like, what do I say to the people when I go there? What do I say? Like, who do I say that sent me? Like, how do I deal with this when they see me, this guy that was in exile, 80 years old, starting my purpose, 80 years old? Like, what they're going to ask me, who sent you? What do I do? What do I say, God?" And this is God's response. God replies to Moses, "I am who I am." Everyone say, "I am who I am." Say this to the people of Israel, "I am has sent me to you." I am has sent me. Because in that statement, in that statement describes the supremacy, describes the all-encompassing, all-powerful God, Yahweh, the one who is, the one who was, and the one who is to come. It describes the very character and nature of a God that can't be defined, of a God that knows all and is all, and in all things exist in him and through him. It's an incredible truth. And he says, when you go, say the I am sent you. Because this whole understanding of I am, who God is, will be reflected through you discovering who you are. You will never discover who you are until you discover who I am is. Until you can answer the question that Jesus asks you, who am I? Who do you say that I am? You will never fully come into the potential of who you are because he created you in his image. But sin destroyed that image. Sin damaged that image to the place where you were born into this world. When you were born into this world, you were not born into the image of God. You were born into the image of a sinful man called Adam. Sorry, Adam. You were born into a sinful man called Adam. And that's why in Corinthians, Jesus says that he was the second Adam. Paul writes a letter to the Corinthian church, and it says that Jesus becomes the second Adam to save you from yourself, from the line of sin that destroyed you, the line of sin that damaged the image of God that was always on the inside of you. This is the good news. And so who he is will always result, when you understand who he is, will always result in you understanding who you are. The problem in our society today is we don't know where we came from. When you don't know where you came from, you don't know who you really are. It's important to know your history, your origin story. I love watching like superhero origin stories. I love it. It's like where they came from. It gets you into like who they are and why they are the way that they are. When you don't know your origin, you don't have a self-awareness of who you really are and where you're called to go. And that's why it's important to understand that who he is, in that understanding of who he is, we find our origin story. I existed before the beginning of time in God and was appointed in this time to appear to this earth and wear my earth suit. I was appointed in this time because I always existed in spirit in the image of God, but then I was born into the earth to discover who I really am and who I'm called to be. This is the starting line. This understanding really is the starting line. The goal of life is to find the I am, to find who God is so we can find who we are. I don't know if you do this, but anybody ever look through like old pictures of yourself? Like you think about, like, remember your wedding? Like some of you like been married for like, 40 years, whatever. You look back, you're like, man, look, like some of you haven't changed your style at all. Like your same hair, same whatever, that's fine. But like you look through and you're like, man, look what I wore. You ever have those like, look what I wore? Like that was cool back then. You think that it was super cool. And I was looking through some old pictures of myself and I'm like, man, who am I? Because, we society says, what you look like, what you wear, what you have, your clothes, your riches, all these things define who you are, your career path. But it's not, because that's not what God says. And so I want to show some pictures of myself, and that was me. And I look at it like, who am I? Like, who is that? That's actually me. That's what I looked like when I played the drums. This is a very long time ago. But I look at this picture like who I am is not defined by what I look like right now, because I look very scary right there. I wasn't actually a scary person just when I was on the drums, but that was me at one point. I'm thinking, man, who was that guy? Go to the next picture. Because we all have phases. Then I have this phase. Now, this guy right here, that's actually Josh Bloomfield. Where'd you go? That's Josh right here. Like that's. Can you see it? Can you see it? Like, who is that? Eh? Like where is his beard? You look like a little baby. But then me. Look at this. Like, who am I? I don't like. It's such a weird thing for me to see because my outside has changed so much. Let's go to the next. Then I had that. So I had that phase. Then I had that phase. I had these long dreadlocks. And how many remember the dreadlocks? I still have them in a bag in my basement. Praise the Lord. And so like the dreadlocks, and then for a while like I was known as like the dreadlock preacher. That's what people like always called me the guy with dreadlocks. You know, even though most of them thought I just came out of prison. I was like the dreadlock preacher. And then go to the next slide. So this is Michelle and I was looking. I don't know if you can see, but like I religiously, like I'm talking about like religiously, okay, for probably like 15 years wore not only a wallet chain and a spiked belt, but I had a handkerchief in my back pocket. And I don't know about you, but I was in this music scene. It was cool back then. It was just cool. And I literally had it everywhere I went, remember? Everywhere I went. I still have it somewhere. But anyways, this is the product. Go to the next slide. Then I had like the big bun, the big dreadlock bun. You know, this is when I was on TV. This is years ago on a TV show on the Miracle Channel. And the big dreadlock bun. And I developed shoulder problems because my hair was so heavy when I came out of the shower. It's like 5 pounds of hair. Go to the next slide. Then I had a shaved head. You remember that? I had a shaved head. And it looked like I had leopard print all over my head because I had dreadlocks for 7 years. And I developed bald spots, like in like leopard print all over my head. Some of you remember that when I shaved my head. It was like a big deal. And I cut Michelle out of that because I didn't know if she wanted me to show a picture. I didn't ask for permission, so we cut her out. And go to the next slide. Then I had like the mohawk face. Like this is like the phases of my life. I'm just go to the next slide. Then I had like the weird faux hawk. Like that looks weird to me now. I'm like, that was cool back then. You had that. Yeah, it just looks weird now. Eh? You think like, who are we? Like, go to the next one. And then I had the beard. Like Michelle loved that. She loved it when it went into her mouth when we were kissing. She loved that. Go to the next one. Then I had the man bun. Like some samurai soldier. Like, what's up with that? Like, it was cool. And, some people still have the man bun. It's still kind of cool, right? Right? Go to the next one. Then I had the workout phase. And then that's when I was super healthy. I was super healthy back then. And so, these are the faces, you guys. These are the faces. Anyways, that's who I am. But it's not really who I am. I was kind of just poking fun at myself. But it's funny because people will often define who you are by what they see. By what you do, by what you wear, by how you talk, they'll define you. But it doesn't really change who you really are. Because what you wear, what you do, your career path, your choices in life, the wealth that you have or don't have will come and go. It will change. But when you can understand who you are, it doesn't matter what anybody else says about you. And when you know who you are, you stand at the starting line of life, ready to run the race well and finish well. But if you don't know who you are, you've already lost the race before you start. If you start a business, if you launch into a business, you launch into a relationship, a marriage, and you don't know who you are, you're setting yourself up for failure. If you don't know what you're called to, what I mean by that is fear can creep in, right? Fear can creep in and well, what if I fail? And I'm maybe in your mind who you have been has been a failure. You've failed at 10 business startups already. And so starting this new business, you're at the starting line, but you feel like the past is still defining you. The failure part of you is still defining you. Maybe you started a diet 10 times and didn't finish the diet or didn't come into the lifestyle of health and you've given up and you feel like you can never change the composition of your body, or you feel discouraged because you just feel like emotions set in and you just want to eat, or maybe it's some other kind of addiction that you feel like you conquer for a bit, but then you come back into after you conquer for a bit, and every time you start a new journey of trying to move forward, whether it's a relationship, a job opportunity, or whatever, whenever you try to start to move forward, already in the back of your mind, you say to yourself, well, I was this way in the past, so I must still be this right now in the present. And if you allow yourself to live there and go there, you've already failed before you started the race. It's so important to know who we are, but only if we understand who He is. Because in who He is, we understand who we really are, because we existed in Him, as a part of Him, before the foundation of the world. So think about it. The discovery of who He is, in Him we find ourselves. The Bible is very clear. In him we find and have and move in our being. We have everything we need in him. I think about this phrase that I've often heard. It's been coined often. Like we never know that Jesus is all we need until Jesus is all that we have. There's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of truth in that. We never know that Jesus is all we need until we realize that Jesus is all we have. When God takes, or life takes, or situations take things away from us, or remove some things from our life, and we go through loss, we go through pain, and we go through change. When we go through all of these things, often that has the ability, either one, to make you bitter or make you better. And you have the choice. You can either become bitter or better through it. Through the loss, the change, through the turmoil, the woundedness. You can either become bitter or become better. Because it's in those moments that God sometimes just wants you to realize that, like, hey, I want to be all that you really have. I want to be everything to you. I want to be all things to you. I don't want you to rely on people. I don't want you to rely on things, material wealth, material possessions, because those things are all going to be taken away at some point in your life. You may lose it. It may get stolen. You know, it may burn up, whatever. But ultimately, if you have me, you have everything you need. You have everything that you need. Let's go to Matthew 16 again really quick, 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And some say John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And just to go back to that a little bit, because once again, they are saying these things about who they believe Jesus is based upon what he does. Because they're comparing the what with what others have done. They're comparing the what with what Jeremiah did. They're comparing the what with what Elijah had done. They're comparing the what with what John the Baptist had done. And so they're thinking in their mind, well, maybe he's John the Baptist. Maybe he's so-and-so. Maybe he's so-and-so because of what they do. But then he turns and says, don't worry about what they say based upon the what I do. Who do you say that I am? Who am I? Jesus asks the question, not because he knows or doesn't know the answer. He wants you to hear your own answer. Because once you hear your own answer, you're held accountable because you come into agreement with the confession of your faith. If your faith is you are just a man, that's where your faith is. You come into agreement that he's just a man. If your faith is he is the Son of Man, the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who takes the sin of all humanity away from them to restore relationship, if you say that, you come into agreement in faith that he is that. God asks you a question never because he doesn't know the answer. He asks you a question so you hear your own answer. So you can be held accountable to the truth of the reality of God on the inside of you. Are you with me? We have to look past the masks of what to see the who. And I think that's a sad thing in our society that we go through this and we judge by what we see. We were at a park this week. I'm not really teaching today. I'm just going to be sharing a little bit. I'm just sharing encouragement. Is this okay? Just sharing encouragement. I want to encourage you today. We were at a park this week with Harvest, and we were out there, and all our kids, and I think it was, I don't know, day 3 or something. I don't remember. But there was a party going on, like a birthday party for some, I guess, kids in the community, whatever. And there's a bunch of like 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and I think probably the oldest was maybe 10 or 11. And I was just watching, and this may not be profound to you, but it was super profound to myself. And then when I told my wife, she was like, wow. I was standing there, and I was hearing the conversation that was going on. Michelle was talking to one of the mothers, and I was hearing the conversation going on. There's this boy, probably 10 or 11, I don't know his age, and you know, he was overweight. There was a few kids that were overweight that, like, you know, if you went, they would probably say, the doctors would say, you're overweight for your age, you know. That's okay. And this kid was overweight, and obviously was aware of it. And before he took his shirt, because it was a splash pad. Before he took his shirt off, he made this statement in front of all of his friends, and only 1 or 2 of them heard it. But he made this statement. He said, I'm taking my shirt off. He said, I'm fat. That's what he said. He said, I'm fat. And the response of this other 10-year-old blew my mind, okay? You got to think the context of this 10-year-old. He said, you're not fat, you just have fat. And he said this. He said, you're not fat, you just have fat. Then he said this. He said, it blew my mind. He said, the same way that you have a fingernail doesn't make you a fingernail. I was like 10 years old. Like a revelation. I mean, and he's of a different faith too. A revelation, okay, of what you have does not define who you are. Like, I am not what I have. I may have an issue in this area. I may have an issue in this area. But I am not that issue. I just have an issue. I am not fat. I just have fat. The same way that I have a fingernail doesn't make me a fingernail. I thought that was just absolutely mind-blowing that in the lips of this 10-year-old boy, such strong understanding of identity. And really the only reason why anybody would even say this kid was overweight probably is because of what society has determined is overweight. Right? What people say. What social media says. What maybe at times the family says, because they compare you to the siblings and they say, well, he's not this way, so you shouldn't be this way. But what if his body type is just different? Right? What you have does not define you. I love that. I just blew my mind. Stacey Campbell, like a mother, a spiritual mother to Michelle and I in the faith. She lives in Kelowna, British Columbia, and she's an internationally known prophet. She just recently met with the Pope for 2.5 hours. A bunch of my friends, incredible experience. They only usually meet for like an hour. With Pope will only usually have like an hour, but they had such a good time. It was like a 2.5 hour meeting. There's a few of my friends there, and they just were blown away at the answers that the Pope gave them when they asked questions. Super encouraging to hear. And she made this statement a long time ago to me. She said, Shawn, you need to know who you are and who you're not. You need to know who you are and who you're not. But the truth is that when you discover who you are, you automatically know who you're not. When you discover who you are, it's really easy to understand who you're not. But if you try to figure out only who you're not, you'll never really figure out who you are. Because the I am statement is so powerful. He said, I am fat. That's a life-defining statement right there. I am ugly, life-defining statement right there. I am unloved, life-defining statement. I am rejected, life-defining statement. I am unworthy, life-defining statement. But Jesus, or God, the Father, the personality of the Godhead, the Father, responds to Moses. When Moses says, who am I? God's response is, tell him that I am sent you. That I am the one who is and is to come. That everything that you need is found in me. You want to define who you are? Who you are, Moses? You are somebody sent by I am. That is who you are. You are identified with me. You are a reflection of me. Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. As you think here, you begin to live out here. You know that? You think you're fat, you think you're ugly, you think you're rejected, you're going to begin to live that out here. Start thinking the good thoughts, the God thoughts. Man, I am loved. I am beautiful. I am incredible. This is not a motivational speech. This is Bible. I am loved. I have grace and truth inside of me. I have mercy behind me. I have all things that I need in Christ who strengthens me. I have power on the inside of me to change my environment. I have encouragement at the door waiting to empower my spirit and my soul. I have a renewed mind. I have a God who loves me. I have a family who loves me, even if sometimes you don't feel it. By the declaration of your words, you are reflecting really what's in your heart. I want to read this couple more passages to you, then I'm done. Mark 4, verse 35 to 40. It's the story. I'm not going to read the whole passage, but it's the story that many of you already know. Jesus is in the boat with his disciples, and they're trying to cross over to the other side, and the storm hits. Okay, the storm hits, and they're afraid. Jesus is sleeping in the bow of the boat. He's sleeping. He's passed out, and the storm hits. They're all trained, seasoned fishermen, and they're freaking out. They're fearful. They don't know what's going to happen. They think they're going to die in this storm. Fast forward to really the last part of this story in verse 40. After Jesus got up, after he silenced the waves, this was Jesus' statement in verse 40. He asked the disciples, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" My paraphrase version of this is, do you not know who you are? Because fear, like I said in the beginning, will cause you to lose the race at the starting line before you even begin. When fear creeps in, fear is always the result of forgetting who you are. When you come into a season or a moment or a situation where fear is gripping your heart, in that moment, it's because you're forgetting who you are and whose you are. You're forgetting who God defined you as. You're forgetting who you are. Wait a minute. God said, let's cross over to the other side. God gave me authority. He gave me power. So why am I fearful right now? If I know who I am, I know whose I am. If I know who I am, it's because I know who God is, the great I am. And he's with me in the bow of the boat right now. So why should I fear? Fear will rob you from beginning the race of anything in life. Building a business, starting a relationship, getting married. Fear will cause you to lose before you even begin. And fear is a result of forgetting who you are. And I was thinking about some things in our life right now where I'm a little bit like, oh God, this is like a big decision. And last night I was thinking about it, and it's mentally just exhausting me. And I had harvest. I had my newborn on my chest, and I was laying down. I just closed my eyes and just was praying, thinking, meditating, and Psalms 46:10 kept coming to me. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still. I was just like in this place, harvest is on me, like the harvest, the harvest, the result of a seed sown. Right, the result of a seed sown. Harvest is laying on me. And I'm thinking, be still and know. And in that word know means to perceive and understand who God is. And that only comes in stillness, when you can be still and stop all the things. Like, stop. I bet you if the disciples just stopped looking at all the storm in front of them and all the waves around them and all the water in the boat, they just stopped for a second and reminded themselves who he is with them in that moment, they would have come into or stepped into who they are in him. They would have reminded themselves of who they are, what God had given them. God had given them the provision. He is the great I am. All things exist in him. And in that moment, I remember thinking, like, I could breathe. It was like a different sense of like breath was coming to me. Like, be still and know. Man, when I can be still and know, that fear begins to just shift. It begins to leave. You know why? Because love steps in. Because ultimately the understanding of who God is the understanding of love. And when love steps in, love replaces fear with faith. When love steps in, love replaces fear with faith. How do I know that? Let's read this one last passage, then we're done. 1 John 4, verse 15. All who declare that Jesus is the Son of God have God living in them, and they live in God. We know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. God is what? He is love. He doesn't love, he is love. Changes it, right? Like, God doesn't love, he is love. And you can't help but do what you are. Verse 16, we know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love. God is love. And all who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. Verse 17, and as we live in God, our love grows more perfect. You could look at it like, as we focus on that love, as we focus on being still, as we focus on understanding the who he is part, our love grows more perfect alongside like him. So we will not be afraid. Everyone say, not be afraid. We'll not be fearful. We won't live in fear. We will not be afraid on the day of judgment. But we can face him with confidence because we live like Jesus here in this world. Verse 18, key verse. Such love has no fear. Because perfect love, what? Expels all fear. Perfect love expels all fear. That word fear literally means to withdraw from. You know that fear will cause you to withdraw from God. Fear in a relationship, fear in business, fear in your job, fear in life will always cause you to withdraw in life. It will pull you away. It will separate you. That's why we need to be still and know. Be still and know, because when we are still and know, his love replaces fear with faith. Because the opposite of faith is not unbelief, it's fear. Why are you so fearful, disciples? Do you still not have what? Faith. Because fear will rob you from the faith you need to have in a moment. And the only reason why fear robs you is because you don't have an understanding of the I am. And the I am is love. Love casts out all fear.